Welcome to Ignite Intimacy, a podcast exploring intimacy, romantic relationships, sexuality, and everything that relates to these hot topics. We're going in. Are you ready? This is your host, Laura Aisha. Let's do this. Ignite Intimacy community, we have got a special episode here for you on this kind of wraps up our Valentine's Day month, February, month of love conversation series. And we are featuring Paul Browde. He is an incredibly brilliant and gifted, talented human being. He's a medical doctor and psychiatrist. He works largely with couples in New York City. He's also a member of the teaching faculty at Columbia University. And he's also got a very interesting company called Narrative. It's a personal storytelling company. So get ready for this conversation. This is all about couples, relationships, developing intimacy, identifying our points of connection, and becoming more related with each other. So go in, enjoy this conversation, and listen all the way to the end. We've got a challenge for you that will support you in getting more related and connected to everyone that you come across with. And remember, we've got South by Southwest live podcast recording coming up on Saturday, March 9th at 9:30 a.m. at the JW Marriott. If you are attending South by Southwest and you're a badge holder, please come, get there early. The conversation starts at 9:30 at the JW Marriott. We'll have some information in the show notes about that. And then also we have another erotic poem by Noel at the very end of this episode. So make sure you listen all the way through. Thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll talk soon. Hello, Ignite Intimacy community. I am here with a special guest. I had the pleasure of sitting next to Paul Browde at Esther Perel's event in New York City last November. And little did I know, as we were, chit-chatting before the session began, what I would experience with this man being on stage and sharing one of his practices that he uses in his work with clients in front of the audience. And it was really quite profound. So I actually felt an immediate connection with you, Paul, and I'm so excited to have you on the line with us today.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah. So I want our audience to really understand who you are and all of the different things that you do in the world with regards to your work as a therapist and a couples, working with couples and relationships, and then all of the other things that you're creating with Narrative and your storytelling company. So talk to us a little bit about who you are and what you're currently up to in the world.
Great. So it's such a wonderful question, and it's one that I really struggle with because so many people encourage me to try and get it all down into some kind of coherent narrative of how exactly what I do, and bringing all the pieces together to make complete sense. And actually what I've come to realize is hopefully one day when I'm at the end of my days, I'll look back and it will all make sense.
Yeah, you're highly creative, right? So you've got this creativity bubbling out of you, which is really amazing. And it was apparent to me when we first met. It's like you've just got this incredible energy that's just sourcing through you as a channel.
Well, that's very much how I see it, that I do feel like a channel, and I think I always have. And I think, so for me, the central theme of all that I do seems to be the notion that our relationships live in the space between us, rather than that they live in our head or they live in our conversations with one another, that there really is a space that every human being has between themselves and another. And every space is unique. So my relationship with you and the space that you and I have with one another is different from any other space that either of us have. It's quite magical when you think about it, that with
I
7
love
billion
that.
people on the planet, we would have a very different space with every single one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And I've spent many years exploring that space in a different number of different ways. So the one way is that many years ago in New York City, I bumped into someone who'd been a friend at school when we were kids in South Africa. And I remembered, his name was Murray, and I remembered that at school when we were 14 years old, I had humiliated him in front of the class. It was just a moment, but I said something in front of the class that was so humiliating to him, and he blushed from head to toe, and the whole class laughed. And I never forgot it. And here we were 20 years later, or more, 25 years later, in New York City, bumping into one another, not having seen each other for all those years. And the first thing that I did on saying, "Hi, how are you?" was apologizing for what I had done when we were 14. And the most amazing thing was that he remembered it too, very, very clearly, because that incident lived in the space between us. And in fact, if there had been any hope of us being friends when we were young, that put an end to it. Well, the apology cleaned up something in the space so that we were now able to start having a conversation about the friendship that we could have had and about the many different ways in which our lives had been similar and different growing up in South Africa. So we were both gay, we were both Jewish, we were both white South African boys. So looking at those, you might think that we were very similar, but through the sharing of stories, we started to learn the differences that we had. And we created a performance out of the stories that we were telling one another. I mean, it started with just 6 people, family therapists actually, who we shared a few of our stories with. But then it started to grow and it took on this magical life of its own. Producers saw us and said, "This is theatrical. It's not just therapeutic. It's theatrical. You should go to the Edinburgh Festival," which we did. And we started to practice telling stories to one another and listening to one another. And our philosophy was based on the idea that our listening shapes the telling of another. So if you think of listen, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a second because so I didn't realize, so this gentleman that you began this storytelling movement with, he's the same person that you had this issue with as a child and you had said something to him in school. Did I make that?
No, that's correct. Exactly.
Wow,
he was the same guy.
That's awesome. That is amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So, a simple apology in an East Village bar basically led us to be on the Edinburgh Festivals, on a stage, 30 shows, so-called shows, because they were never scripted. And we had certain rules. So we created it as a meditation, really, where we focused in on our listening and how we were listening to one another and letting go of obstacles to listening. So letting go of judgments, letting go of trying to change or fix the other's story, and just being wide open to anything that the other would say. And then we'd go up on a stage in front of an audience and stories would pour out. And so the idea was that the listening shapes the telling. The listening is like a bowl, and the telling take the shape of the bowl. So that was very powerful for me because we did that for many, many years. And we then eventually created a company called Narrative, in which we teach people how to listen and how to tell stories in the way that we did. And it was powerful because I started to realize the importance of listening, that listening is such an access to intimacy.
Oh, yeah.
we often think of it as talking. If I tell you my deepest, darkest secrets, you'll feel close to me. But it's really, if you listen to me in a wide open way, that starts to create closeness. And if we can listen back and forth to one another, that really is what intimacy is about. So that was the one form of research that I did, was the storytelling work. The other was that I've been a psychiatrist. So I am a psychiatrist, and I went to medical school, and I did psychiatry, and I've spent 30 years as a psychiatrist listening to people, and I've become very aware of all the obstacles to listening that a professional training puts in your way. So when you've got a professional training, as people speak, you start to file their speaking in particular boxes. So if it's diagnosis or treatment or these kinds of descriptions of people's lives, like personality disorders, these kinds of diagnoses really shut down the ability to listen in a wide open way. And so for me, being a psychiatrist has been a very powerful spiritual practice, really, at letting go of all that I know and being new and in the moment with the person as if for the first time.
Mm,
And sometimes it requires wearing two hats.
mm.
You have to put on the hat of someone actually may need your professional knowledge, but you've got to also be able to let it go, I
Yeah.
believe, to be able to really connect.
Well, yeah, and to be like human with someone, right? As opposed to the expert or the studied person who knows the ins and outs of, whatever it is that you're approaching through the work. And
Exactly.
so, this month, February, we've been focusing all of our conversations around the topic of Valentine's Day and the sort of like the love month, and the good, the bad, the frustrating, the triumphant, talking a lot about self-love, because whether you're in a relationship or not, we have challenges, we have issues with that. Some of us want to be in relationships and we're not. Some of us are in relationships that we're not happy with, where there's no power and, no joy and connection. So I'm really curious. I mean, this listening piece is essential. It's something that I've been diving more deeply into and really training myself to listen better and just listen more, be open, be a space of actually being out there with people and listening to where they're at, getting into their shoes and really seeing the world from their perspective. So, as we're talking in this conversation more around the couple's relational aspects of the work that you do, and then this listening and storytelling to create deeper levels of intimacy, share a little bit about the work that you do as in private practice in New York City, working with couples.
Yes. So the couples work that I do is something known as encounter-centered couples therapy. And an encounter is something that was described by the philosopher Martin Buber, where he said when two people honor the space between them as sacred and honor one another, he talked about you could see everybody as an it, or you could see everybody as a thou. So when you honor someone else with the thou way of being, and you honor the space as sacred, what happens is you have a moment together in which all time disappears and all the past disappears, and you are together in this moment. And he called that the encounter of the souls. Now, in the couples work that I do, is I work with people to create the right circumstances to have an encounter. And what that requires is people sitting together, knee to knee, holding each other's hands and looking in each other's eyes, breathing together. And then the one invites the other to visit their world. And the person who's inviting is the host, and the person who visits is the visitor.
Mm-hmm.
And the visitor crosses what I talk about as a bridge, a metaphorical bridge between their hearts. And the visitor lands in the world of the host. And the role of the visitor is to let go of any preconceptions about this person and just be there with them in the present moment. So that's really difficult with someone you've lived with for many years or someone you've got very fixed ideas about. So it takes tremendous discipline to just let go of everything you know and bring new eyes to this person. And when that happens, and people can do it, everybody can do it. I think it's a natural human capacity to just be with another person without judgment. All the problems fall away, and what is there is the moment of connection, and people feel profoundly connected. And then the brain starts to learn how to do that. And so the more couples can practice that, the more they can live in that space. That doesn't mean that people don't have disagreements or problems, but the disagreements and problems don't become the whole space between them because they're starting to learn how to have a space of connection between them. So the couples work, it's very strange for people because, you know, we all have been taught that when you go for couples therapy, you bring issues in that need to be discussed. And this is not about the content. This is about the process.
Yeah,
so they can talk about anything.
Yeah, it's like the issues they're just like stories you've created, and like you said, like narratives that you have about fixed narratives about who the other person is based on your experience with them. And there's something so powerful when you actually just take all of that out of the space. Like I call it the blah, blah, blah.
Yes, exactly.
Like whatever your constant complaints are about the other person, when you can just like take that out of the space as if it doesn't even exist or matter and just like focus on the human being in front of you, there's something really profound and beautiful that can happen.
Exactly. And what's really funny is if you ask people about the complaint, the particular complaint, it's usually been around way, way longer than the person they're now with. So,
exactly.
So people are bringing their early childhood experiences into the relationship, and that's why it keeps feeling the same as it's always felt. So, yeah, that's really helpful to just take away the content and focus on the space. And Valentine's Day, it's such an interesting one for me because I notice as you say it that I have an instant reaction to Valentine's Day, a negative reaction.
Yeah, tell us.
Well, growing up as a gay boy, all these traditions I didn't belong to any of these traditions. So I can still remember the terrible discomfort of being invited to, dance parties or dinner dances where I was going to either be sitting on the outside, like as if I was a single person, or I would have to pretend to be with a woman, or I wouldn't go. And Valentine's Day always felt to me like it had nothing to do with me. There was no way that I could have that. Now things have changed, and I've actually I've been in a relationship for 32 years, and we're legally married. But that's an example of that old feeling of not belonging.
Yeah.
That just crops up as I hear the word of Valentine's Day. And I do believe, and I can actually celebrate it. And I love the fact that in America, everybody wishes you happy Valentine's Day. It's not just doesn't seem to be only in your relationship. Like, people will just, you walking on the street, people say happy Valentine's Day, or the person on the phone who's from the phone company will wish you happy Valentine's Day. So there's something about having one day where you focus on being loving or connected to other people. The only thing is, I think it's so sad that it should be one day. I mean, it should be every day. Because the quality of it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the quality of your life. If every single day you're thinking about, buying someone who you love flowers or giving them a card or thanking them or being grateful for who they are in your life, that adds such a dimension to the quality of your life.
Absolutely.
Really, that's all we have is the relationships we have.
Well, and
And I,
well,
yeah,
there's something about, yes, like every day is an opportunity for us to be in love with ourselves, with each other, with life, and to create more opportunities for love and connection. And
yes.
the critic in me is saying, yeah, but wouldn't that get old, or wouldn't it then become not so special? Or, so I'm just noticing that there's that voice there that's like, maybe there is maybe it is good that it's one day where, we focus on that and remember that. However, I know in my heart of hearts that at the foundation, the more that we're all focusing on love and connection and what actually, brings us together, the better that our world will be. The more peaceful, the more connected, the more, thriving. And from what I could tell.
It's interesting what you're saying. Very interesting to me, because there's somewhere what you're saying is that we might get bored and tired of being loving to each other every day, but don't we get bored and tired of being unloving and critical and judgmental of each other every day, which we are. We live in a world that's
Mm-hmm.
so judgmental and critical. And I actually think that we believe on some level that it is our wounds and our problems that connect us. And that's why we get so engaged in talking, negatively with one another. Because I don't think we really are schooled in other ways of connecting. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it would be boring. I think it could
Mm-hmm.
be quite extraordinary. It would be a worthwhile experiment to
Yeah.
have 1 year of Valentine's Days just to see how it works.
Well, maybe we need to start a movement then.
Yeah, 90 days of Valentine's Day. Like, yeah,
All right, we'll talk about that offline.
yeah. Mm.
So yeah, so it's in this work that you've been doing. I actually had the opportunity to witness this practice that you do with couples
Yes,
firsthand. And you actually chose two men because the Esther Perel event was focused on the masculinity paradox.
correct. Yes. Yeah, I chose two men and I asked for two men who didn't know one another. And I also asked for two men who weren't necessarily comfortable with intimacy with another man. I mean, it was an experiment because I do believe that a lot of the pain that men suffer and that I think then affects women in their lives is the pain of not being able to be connected with other men, right? So that it feels like an important exploration is how to get men to really be able to just listen and talk to one another without any pretense. So interesting. I did some of this work in Bulgaria last year, been involved in a project for many years, teaching people storytelling and listening in Eastern Europe. And so I brought together two men who live in Bulgaria to try this experiment. And the one man turned to me and he said, I cannot look this man in the eye. He said, I just cannot do it. And he said, the only time I ever look another man in the eye is when I'm going to fight with him. He said,
Mm.
that's the best way to fight is you look in the eye and then you know what the other's going to do. So he said, for me, as I look another man in the eye, it stimulates the fight flight response, which is exactly the opposite of what the intention is to really quieten the fight flight response. So he needed a lot of help to just be able to sit and look. He looked away, he looked, and eventually he started to create some other association with it. And I think that's a very stark example, but I think it's true for a lot of men. And so that's why I chose to do it with men. But
I
I
love
also
that.
see it with couples too, where a lot of couples don't spend time looking at each other, just looking
Mm.
into each other's eyes.
Mm.
Very threatening. It's uncomfortable, feels weird to people. And so part of it is getting over that weirdness, just being able to breathe and say, hey, this is the person I live with and love, and can I actually trust them enough to just look into their eyes for a while?
Mm. Well, and
Yeah.
we talked about how couples move into, many couples, not all, but many couples move into survival mode with each other.
Yes,
And
exactly. So
there's
yeah,
no creation there. There's no like inspiration or creation energy there. It's just like surviving day after day, and the, you know, like all the stories and all the complaints and all the everything is right there, and they're just
exactly.
surviving. So how have you seen this work with, you know, gazing at each other, listening,
Mm.
releasing judgment? How have you seen that shift couples from that survival mode into creating a life of inspiration together?
First of all, it's physiological. So if people sit and look into each other's eyes and breathe together, the brains do calm down. And there's now an understanding of something called limbic resonance, where the limbic systems calm down and then start to synchronize with one another. Limbic systems being the seats of the emotions. And so just sitting and looking and breathing is a really helpful way of moving out of survival and into using the whole brain. You being able to really use your creativity. And then when people are in that state, what I do with people, which is such a wonderful conversation, is ask them to dream together. So I'll say to a couple, what is the wildest dream or your deepest aspiration for yourselves as a couple? And I have each one speak about that for at least half an hour. So it's not just a quick, 3 sentences. It's a fleshed out, fully realized daydream. People are so easily able to talk about their worries, and they can
Mm.
create whole scenarios about the way the future might go wrong and how hard it could all be. But it's much harder for people to sit and imagine a future where everything's going really well and they're on an adventure together, and what it
Hmm.
could look like and feel like, and engage the senses as well, looking at tastes and smells and sights, and just starting to get a real picture of how a future could look together.
Mm.
And so
Well,
I'll
and
listen.
just to
Yeah.
set the stage for our audience, Paul works with couples in, you do like 2-day sessions, right? So you're with a couple for
Yes.
large chunk of time.
Yes. So one of the ways in which I work, not every couple can do it for various reasons, but those who can, I work from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. 2 consecutive days.
Wow.
Because what that allows you to do is it's an immersion in the new way of being. So it really gives time for the brains to start learning this place of connection. And you start off with the dreams, and then you teach them the crossing of the bridge into each other's worlds. And then I help people go to different places in the other's world. So we visit each other's childhoods. It's a very moving experience to watch someone visit the childhood of the person that they love, because they've heard a lot about the childhood, but they've never been there. And so they literally enter the other's childhood story as a character. They come there, they arrive back in the past, in the childhood, and even if it's wanted, will talk to members of the person's childhood and advocate for the person. So people leave that experience with a different memory of childhood than they had before, because they now have their partner with them in the past. It's amazing what you can do with time
That's,
travel.
oh my gosh, that sounds incredible.
Mm.
Because it's like, you know, when you start to really get with someone's experience, even if you can't relate to it, you start to, I mean, for me, I start to develop more empathy for that person and compassion, and you know, my heart starts to open up a bit and understand why there are certain reactions to things or resistance to things.
Absolutely. It's amazing how it works. And especially if you've been with them in the childhood experience that created a certain behavior, then when they have that behavior as an adult, you still have the compassion that you had for the child that they were during the process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very different. It really does change things because you don't take it personally, first of all. It's not about you. It's about something that happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows you to have a greater understanding and compassion. Yeah. And within the 2-day experience, once you've taught people about going to these either neutral places or happy places, also invite people, very important for people to go into areas in the other's world of joy, precious, what we call neighborhoods, because they really are like neighborhoods within your own experience. So for me to invite you to see a precious neighborhood in my experience is very important. And if you're a couple, people don't often know about all the good places that their partner inhabits.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, you can also teach people, you can guide people to go to the most difficult places in their relationship. And what happens is because they've practiced it for a couple of days at this point, it's not personal. They realize it's not about the other. Even the most difficult places are about your partner's own experience. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can just be there and listen to it, it becomes an opportunity for growth together. And the greatest thing for me is that a relationship, and I believe this is true of all relationships that we have, not only the ones in which we are, intimately or romantically involved, but they're all adventures. They're all opportunities for growth and learning. I think it's why we have them. So
Mm-hmm.
if we see them as that rather than as a problem that needs to be solved, and I think a lot of couples start to think of their relationship as a problem that needs solving rather than an adventure to be lived together. And yes, there are difficult parts of adventures. Sometimes they're really stressful and painful and uncomfortable. But if you together see them as an adventure, then those painful, difficult parts have a very different meaning. They're part of the adventure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and so what have you discovered as well through the storytelling that you've developed, the one-to-one and group storytelling? Share with us some of the experiences that you've had in that particular space.
Sure. I mean, so the first one that comes to mind is that I've been teaching in the narrative medicine program at Columbia for the last many years. And that is a program that's really, the idea is that when people are able to read literature or write literature, they are better healthcare providers. They will be able to listen and understand the people that they work with better.
That's
It
fascinating.
actually also means that so people are better doctors and people are also better patients, by the way, because there's patients, it's really helpful for patients to understand that the doctor is also a person, a multifaceted person. But we work with the doctors, we work with the healthcare providers. And the course that I've taught is called Co-Constructing Narratives. And what we do is we bring together a group of healthcare providers and ask them to work individually on an illness narrative of their own. So they write a story of an illness that either they've had or someone very close to them has had that has affected them personally. And then we read the stories. The teacher, I co-teach this course, so we both read the stories, and then we decide based on the stories, not on the people who wrote them, based on the stories, we find some common links and we pair the stories together. And then we bring the people who wrote the stories and they become pair. And they spend the rest of the semester excavating their stories with one another and looking for points of contact. And the idea being that each person's story is greater when it is told in connection with another than it ever could be on its own. Because the other person's story highlights either places where their stories are the same or contradictions in the story. And eventually they tell as their final, call it exam, their final assignment, they do a joint performance of a joint story. And
Interesting.
it's been so moving over the years to watch people come together who didn't know each other and based on one story start to really learn one another. And the points of connection are magical. And
Mm,
it's been so important for me to watch this year after year, because I really believe if you take any two human beings in the world, any two human beings, and you put them together in a room with the right circumstances, so you create a safe space for them to listen and talk, they will find connections in their stories that
mm,
will keep them, that will profoundly connect them to one another. So,
Can you give us an example that you're comfortable sharing or that you're able to share?
well, I'd rather give you an example from my own story, actually, with Murray,
Okay.
than tell you the story of any of the people in the class. Because, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the ethics that I have around storytelling is that your story belongs to you,
Mm-hmm.
and it is yours. It's actually something that you own, your story, and therefore it's not for me to tell anyone else's. Even though people
Mm-hmm.
might not mind. But in the story with Murray, so I think that's a really good place to look. So when I apologized to Murray at the age, in our 30s, for what I had said to him when we were 14, what came out was that he had been silenced at school for many years by the bullying that was going on. And I was just one of the people that symbolized that bullying. It wasn't a major bullying, he'd had much worse, but it was enough to cause him pain. And that he had been silenced by that and didn't feel that he could tell a story. And when he confided in me that he had a story he couldn't tell, it allowed me to tell him that I was living with a story I couldn't tell. So, one of the most profound teachings of my life is that when I was 24 years old, I was diagnosed with HIV.
Wow.
That was in 1985, and it was a death sentence. So I was living for many years with a certain knowledge that I was going to die in the next few years. Just
Wow.
it wasn't really a question. It was just a matter of when. And I I kept not dying, so I kept doing things, and then but not telling anyone. I lived with this as a secret for many, many years.
Wow.
And if so, it was the idea that, and the silencing of that story was really killing me. It was creating tremendous anxiety for me. I was worried. I was now at that point studying to be a psychiatrist, and I was terrified that I'd never have a job. If anyone found out, or that I'd get kicked out of my program where I was studying, if anyone found out, no one would ever want to be with me. There were just all these ways in which the silence was killing me. And so, through that connection with Murray and the understanding of how he had been silenced, I realized how I had been silenced. And I chose to stop being silenced and to tell my story publicly, which I did. I actually told the story of being HIV positive at the American Psychiatric Association conference.
Wow.
And that was such a liberation for me. It took years for the anxiety, I think really the trauma of being HIV positive in the 80s to subside, when the new medications came out and that became very clear that I wasn't going to die. It took years for the body to respond to that relief. But the mind responded very quickly, because suddenly people knew and I could talk about it, and there was nothing anyone could ever have on me that I hadn't already said.
Mm, I love
And it
that.
creates,
It's
yeah, and
freedom. It's like,
it
ah.
was freedom. Yeah, absolutely. And it still is. It still is freedom right now. There's still a part of me that thinks, why the hell are you telling this right now? Why are you talking about this? But
Yeah.
the truth is, it's such an important part of my life. It is one of the great gifts of my life, that learning that something which was so frightening and so terrible has been such a venue for intimacy and for connection
Mm.
with
Yeah, I can.
myself and with
Yeah.
everyone else.
I mean, I relate. I have herpes. And so for me, that felt like a death sentence,
Mm,
and I've been living with it for probably 14, 15 years now. And it, it was devastating to me to find
yes.
out. And I just thought, how am I ever going to have like a partner and have sex with people, like, and,
Right.
be the sexual being that I am. And so over time, and it's been a huge, huge blessing. I mean, talk about self-love and fostering self-love in the face of something that, to me at the time just was like, oh man, this is rough. And then when I started sharing it, I actually came out publicly on the podcast about a year and a half
Mm,
ago. And
mm,
yeah, and it was just like, I need to talk about this because there's such a stigma around it, and so many people have it and don't talk about it. And it's incredible how, when I speak to partners or potential partners about it, and I'm always shocked when I'm talking with a 50-year-old man who's never come across any type of conversation like this before. And I'm just like,
mm,
are you kidding me? Like, how is
mm.
that even possible? So actually Ignite Intimacy is recording a live podcast conversation at South by Southwest in a couple of weeks. Saturday,
Mm,
March 9th, we're going to be at the JW Marriott, and we're doing a conversation all around making disclosure sexy, right? So that you can feel in your juicy goodness as you're like, oh, by the way, have you been tested? What's your status?
mm.
I have herpes. What about you? And it's like really it's as normal as like, any other conversation that you would have. So thank
That's
you so much.
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so
That
much for
is so important. Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you for sharing with me. I had no idea, obviously, and it's just always amazing to me that when you just speak the truth, what you get back is the truth. It just happens.
yeah. Well,
And
and it doesn't
and
mean that you're like, I just dealt with a situation recently where it was like, I was straight up rejected, like in my
mm,
face, right?
mm,
And I went through all the motions around that,
mm,
because I know who I am and I know what I bring to the table. And it was so, because this person was being so open and so loving, and it felt so good. And it was like, we're so connected. And then, I know better these days than to wait to have the conversation till you're like in the thick of it. So it was like, I'm having
yes.
the conversation right now, like I know when it's there, I need to speak it,
Mm,
and it was like, I spoke it and the whole energy changed, and I was able to
mm,
address it and say like, okay, talk to me about this. Cause like your body language has shifted. You're totally shut off to me when we were
mm,
just sitting like super close and like touching each other and like, and the vibe was so good. Like, talk to me about this. Let's talk about it, you know?
mm.
So yeah. So it doesn't mean that by sharing it, you won't have to deal with some of that stuff. And there was stuff I dealt with the next day, and, just grief and clearing that, and coming back to loving myself,
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. There's this human part of you that's going to feel humiliated and ashamed and all the feelings, but you feel them. It's also okay to feel those things and sort of move
Mm-hmm.
through them. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But the freedom of just being able to say who you are is tremendous.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and, and you can't. Yeah, go ahead.
And the impact that you have on the other person, it's like, I have had men reflect to me like, and this man that I shared with,
Yeah.
and he was like, I just have to like say how incredibly brave you are. Like, that was like, for you to just share that with me was like so incredibly brave.
Yes.
And so I know that every time I do it, whether or not someone still wants to make out with me or eat my pussy or like whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's like, or make love to me, it's like I have an impact on that person. And what was interesting about this particular person, he said he has this woman who does like psychic readings for him. and she
Yeah.
reads his energy. She's in Europe. He's in another part of the country or another part of the world. So he was saying that she just told him recently, use protection when you're having sex with people.
Mm.
And so then here I am sharing this. And then he shared with me that he's never been tested and he's in his late 30s. And I was like, okay, dude, go get a test. Never assume someone's clean, wear protection, have these conversations with people, you know, and like, if I can impact that one person's life and all of the people that he'll connect with on his journey, like that's golden, you know, that's a contribution.
Huge contribution in so many different ways as well.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you know, when you think of what stigma is, you know, and it's almost as if people would rather not know than know.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not knowing allows you to still fantasize some kind of image of what it is rather than facing the reality of things and being wise, being safe and being conscious. Yeah.
I've certainly I've had conversations with other women who, you know, I know this one woman who said, well, you know what, I asked men if they would rather know or not know, and enough said that they would rather not know, so I don't even disclose. And I'm just like, well, and that's why so many people have herpes. Because people don't know they have it, they don't disclose it, they're like, you know. So anyways, we kind of went off on a tangent here with this, and it's so important and powerful, right? It's because it does create intimacy and connection, and you wake people up to, you know, there's the yin and the yang of everything in life, right? So like we have this thing about sex and sexuality and human connection and touch and orgasm and just all of it, that it is so yummy and delicious and it's like the most amazing, right? It's like, so good. And then there's the other side of it that needs to be addressed, because it can also be dangerous and life-threatening. And I mean, there's, you know, and life-changing forever. So I'm just curious, before we wrap up here, when you shared your story, because you were sharing about you and your storytelling partner and your childhood, you know, this person that you went through this thing during childhood, and the simple apology in the East Village, and it brought you together and you started doing these narrative storytelling, and then you came out at this psychology conference. I just want to make sure that we, you know, complete that part of the conversation, because it's so powerful what you chose to do there.
Yes. So is there more?
Well, yeah. So what I want to know is just, you know, when you came out at the psychology conference, like, what was life like for you then? What was the impact on the space, on your relationship with your narrative partner, and just moving forward?
Oh, you know, it was a moment that changed my whole life. So I don't even remember. I think I was dissociated when I actually gave that talk.
Mm-hmm.
But because it was so terrifying, because I was going against the survival part of me was saying, do not talk about this. It is too dangerous. But there was another part of me that was saying, it's time to talk about it. And so I did. And so, first of all, I worked at a hospital at that point, and everybody at the hospital found out, and people were incredibly supportive and warm and helpful and interested. And my friendships, you know, I'd had a lot of friends who hadn't known, and now I could talk to all of them. So my relationships really opened up in terms of the kinds of communication we could have. And yeah, I mean, it's shaped all the work that I do. It feels to me that it's so funny, because I know it's work, what I'm doing, but it doesn't feel like work. It just feels like me being in the world as this person who really thought I was going to die. And here I am. Here I am now, 30, so how many years? 32 years later, still alive, starting to deal with aging, like that whole thing, which I never dreamed that I would do. And just being able to be with it all has been a tremendous gift. Yeah.
It's incredible.
And yeah, it's you know, the experiential lesson is so much more available to me than all the learning that I've done in my mind and in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
if I can deal with that, and which I have, then I can sit with people and help them deal with whatever they have to deal
That's right.
with. There's nothing that people can't deal with. It's just life. This is
That's
life.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I love that.
Mm.
Well, so I'm just curious if there's a takeaway or, something that you'd like to share with our community in terms of developing more intimacy in relationships. Would there be some sort of a takeaway or a challenge that we can pose our listeners with?
Well, I think the challenge is to relate to everybody who crosses your path as someone you're connected to start practicing connection. So it's not just with the people who you want to be connected with, it's with the people, it's with the delivery person or the person at the store, at the pharmacy, when you're buying something. It's being aware that with every single person, there is a space that you occupy, and being aware of that space and considering it sacred. And noticing what you put in the space. So being aware that when you say things to someone or when you don't say things to someone, like I was just thinking of a couple recently where the man said to the woman, "Do you love me?" And she said, "I'll tell you when I changed my mind." Which, rather than, "Yes, I love you," because people are so shy and anxious about saying stuff to one another. So I think what I would encourage people to do is be aware of the space and be bold about what you put in it, and bold in a good way. Say the things that you want to say, but you find embarrassing to say or difficult to say. Just say them. Practice that. Sort of warriors for
Mm-hmm.
connectedness.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah.
love that. All right. So you heard it. Ignite Intimacy Community. Take a day this week and start practicing connection with everyone that you come across in your life, and be aware of the space that you are out in the world and that you occupy with everybody that you come into contact with on your chosen day of connection. And be bold to say what you want to say in a way that generates connection and intimacy and relatedness. Paul, what an incredible pleasure to have you on the line with us and to have this conversation. We've got a bunch of links that we're going to have in the show notes, including your TED Talk. However, will you share your main website address with our audience so people know how to connect with you?
Sure. It's Paul Browde. That's PaulBrowde.com.
Great. Okay, perfect. So paulbrowde.com will have that and other links in the show notes so that you can reach out and connect with Paul directly. Paul, you're such a star. Thank you so much for your time and brilliance and just heart of hearts, heart of gold. So much love for you, and so grateful that we can share you with the Ignite Intimacy community.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be with you. And thanks for sitting next to me at Esther's meeting conference.
I know, what a beautiful serendipitous connection and meeting there. So Ignite Intimacy, you heard it here. Paul Browde and I jamming on some beautiful, powerful topics, really as a stand for all of us to get more related, more connected, more intimate with each other, and to create a better world for generations to come. So
exactly.
Lots and lots of love. This actually wraps up our Valentine's month conversation series. So super grateful, Paul. Thanks again.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Wow, Ignite Intimacy community. Holy moly. That was a powerful conversation. And what a cool shift and opening towards the end there with our conversation about disclosure. I was not expecting that to come up on this one. So again, I want to remind you of our challenge to you, this practice of connection and just practicing connection with every single person that you come across in a day's worth of your life. So choose a day this week and be mindful of practicing connection and like noticing the space that you occupy with each person that you come across in that particular day. So choose a day, get connected, get related, be bold, say what you want to say in a way that creates more connection, intimacy, and relatedness. We have another gorgeous erotic poem coming up from Noelle, and we are so grateful that you've been here with us for our February series of love. We'll keep the love going, though. You know how we do on Ignite Intimacy. And thank you so much for tuning in and being here on this journey with us. We love you so, so much. And we will see you on the next one. And we'll see some of you in Austin on Saturday, March 9th. Love, 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 and ciao for now.
When I say I want you. My love, what risk is there in holding hands with your spirit, entwining with your soul? Not much, really. Where it actually lays it down is somewhere else altogether. So stand in that doorway and leave your eternal self on the other side. Walk in, come to me, as your ego, your personality, your character, and let me finger the topography of what has been shaped with the forces of you rubbing up with the forces of time, of place, of circumstance. Let me study all that you are due only to you being here. This is the loving gamble. This is the hardest part. To worship, to pay homage to that which will not ever last. To hold in excruciating clarity what you have become by way of these environs. Please, when I say I want you, I mean it.
Thanks for tuning in to another conversation on the Ignite Intimacy podcast hotline. We love that you choose to spend your time with us. Check us out at igniteintimacy.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a review and a rating. It helps more people know about us. We love to hear from you. You can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions to hello@igniteintimacy.com. And tell your friends. Music was arranged by Jason Pfaff and Mike Corey, and this podcast is produced by yours truly, Laura Aisha. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, let your light shine bright and ignite your intimacy.